He had always dreamed of living somewhere quiet, where the sound of the wind through the trees could calm his thoughts, and the sight of rippling water could remind him that life didn't have to be so loud. After years of city noise, endless traffic, and crowded apartments, he finally found a small lakeside cabin that seemed to be made just for him. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but the view out the back porch was something he had never seen before. A wide lake stretched out like a mirror, reflecting the sky, and in the mornings, mist would rise from it like a secret waiting to be told. He moved there in early spring, with nothing but his old pickup, a few boxes of tools, and a small fishing boat that had seen better days. The lake was peaceful. Ducks floated quietly near the reeds, and every now and then a few neighbors would wave at him from across the water. He didn't know anyone yet, but he liked it that way. He wasn't running from anyone or anything. He just wanted a place where he could breathe. For the first few weeks, he spent his time fixing things up. The cabin had been empty for years, and there was plenty of work to do. He cleaned the gutters, replaced broken boards on the porch, and painted the trim a soft green to match the trees. Down by the water, an old wooden dock leaned sideways into the lake. He decided to rebuild it. Every evening, after working on the house, he'd go down with a hammer and a flashlight, listening to frogs croak as he measured new planks and tightened bolts. Building that dock became his favorite part of the day. It wasn't about showing off or making the place fancy. It was about peace. He loved sitting at the edge of it when the sun went down, dipping his feet in the cool water. Sometimes he'd take his little boat out and just float there, watching the stars appear one by one. But peace doesn't always last long when there are people who think they know what's best for everyone. It started with a letter in his mailbox. A white envelope typed neatly, with the logo of the Homeowners Association at the top. He had seen the HOA mentioned in his paperwork but hadn't thought much about it. The letter said he was in violation of community standards for constructing an unapproved structure on shared property. It also mentioned a fine if he didn't remove the unauthorized dock immediately. He frowned as he read it. Unauthorized? He had built the dock on his property, the same way the last owner had one before it fell apart. Still, he decided not to get upset. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. A few days later, while he was sanding one of the dock's rails, a woman in a neat suit came walking down the gravel path toward his house. She had a clipboard in her hand and a serious expression on her face. "Good afternoon," she said in a sharp voice. "I'm from the HOA board. We've received reports about your dock." He set down the sander and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Reports?" he asked, trying not to laugh. "I'm just fixing up what was already here." She shook her head. "That structure was never approved. The lake is community property and you can't make private changes to it. You'll need to remove it by the end of the month." He looked out at the lake, then back at her. "The lake's community property," he repeated slowly. "That's right," she said, checking her notes. "Everyone here follows the same guidelines. It keeps our neighborhood beautiful and fair." He didn't argue. He just nodded and said, "All right, I'll look into it." When she left, he couldn't help but shake his head. The way she spoke, it felt like she wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was protecting her control over it. Over the next few weeks, he got more letters. One said his boat was too big for the dock. Another said he was violating a noise rule, even though all he ever did was hammer in the evenings. It felt like they were trying to push him out or maybe just remind him who was in charge. Some of the neighbors began acting strange too. A few waved less often. Others looked away when he passed. Still, he tried to stay kind. He didn't want drama. He just wanted peace by the water, but it became clear that the HOA wasn't going to leave him alone. One morning, while he was loading fishing gear into his boat, he noticed a man standing near the road taking photos of his dock. When he walked over and asked what he was doing, the man simply said, "Documenting violations for the board," and walked away without another word. That evening, another letter arrived, this time warning him of legal action if he didn't comply. He sat at his kitchen table reading it again and again, wondering how something so small had turned into this. He thought about giving in. Maybe tearing down the dock would make them stop. But then he looked out the window at the lake, the place that had given him peace after years of noise and chaos. He had worked hard to make this place his home. Why should he back down when he had done nothing wrong? That night he walked down to the dock and sat at the edge, his feet in the cool water. The moon reflected across the lake like silver glass. He thought about the people who lived around him, the ones who probably didn't even know how the HOA operated. He wasn't trying to fight them. He wasn't trying to break rules. He just wanted to live quietly, to fix what was broken and to enjoy what he had worked for. But as he sat there, he realized something important. The HOA wasn't just mistaken, they were confident. Too confident. They acted like they owned everything, including the lake, and that thought stuck in his mind like a spark that wouldn't go out. Over the next few days, he decided he needed to understand what was really going on. If the HOA claimed the lake was community property, then it had to be written somewhere. He began asking around quietly, listening to what neighbors said about the lake's ownership. Some of them weren't sure. One older resident told him, "I think the lake's private land. The HOA just manages it, or at least that's what they say." That didn't sound right to him. He started thinking about the stack of papers that came with his property when he bought it. The old deed, the survey map, the legal documents no one ever reads closely. He had a feeling that somewhere in those pages was a truth the HOA had forgotten, or maybe ignored. As the sun set behind the trees, he gathered the papers onto his kitchen table and began reading line by line. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly, but he knew one thing for sure. If they wanted to accuse him of breaking rules, he was going to make sure he understood every single one of them. What he didn't know yet was that this small act, this quiet decision to look deeper, was about to change everything for that lake, that neighborhood, and the HOA that thought they ruled it all. After the first letters from the HOA, he realized that living by the lake wasn't going to be as quiet as he hoped. At first, he thought it might be a simple misunderstanding. Maybe someone on the board hadn't realized he was repairing an old dock that had been there for years. He tried to ignore the letters and focus on his projects, hoping it would blow over. But that didn't happen. One morning, as he was fixing a broken board on the dock, a man from the HOA showed up unannounced. He was wearing a crisp shirt and had a clipboard in hand. "Good morning," the man said. "I'm here to inspect your dock. It's come to the board's attention that it's an unauthorized structure." He paused, his hammer still in hand. "Unauthorized?" he asked. "This dock has been here for years. I'm just fixing it up." The man didn't reply. He just took notes and muttered, "You'll need to remove it unless you have proper approval." Then he left as quickly as he came, leaving a stack of forms and notices on the dock. He picked up the papers and read them carefully. The fines were mounting, and the language was more forceful than before. It wasn't just a request anymore. It was a demand, and it didn't stop there. Every few days, more letters arrived, each one more insistent than the last. At first, he felt frustrated. Why would they treat him this way when he had done nothing wrong? But then he remembered something important. He had bought this property legally, and he had all the papers. Maybe it was time to understand exactly what he owned and where their authority ended. He spent the next few days going through every document he had, the deed, the survey maps, and old property records he had received when he bought the cabin. The papers were old and dusty, but they were clear. The lake, and even part of the land where the HOA parking lot sat, were included in his property. He owned it. This revelation surprised him, but it also gave him a sense of calm. The HOA had been acting as if they had power over the lake, but in reality they had none. The dock, the boat, even the small stretch of water he loved to fish in, all his. He decided not to confront the board immediately. He wanted to be certain and careful, so he made copies of all the important documents and kept them neatly in a folder. He knew that when the time came, he would be ready. Meanwhile, the HOA continued their campaign. Notices kept arriving, warning him about fines and legal action. They even suggested that his dock was dangerous and that he was creating a safety hazard for the community. It was exhausting, but he refused to let it get to him. Every evening he would sit on the dock, feet in the water, thinking about how strange life could be. People were so quick to assume someone was doing something wrong without checking the facts. He began to notice the neighbors were also reacting to the situation. Some looked at him with curiosity, whispering to each other. Others seemed nervous, unsure which side to take. A few friendly faces would wave from their porches, while others would cross the street to avoid him. It was clear that the HOA's warnings had created. One afternoon, he decided to take a walk around the property lines. He wanted to understand exactly where his land ended and where the HOA's influence began. Using the survey markers from the documents, he measured the edges of his property, tracing the boundary along the water. It became clear that not only did he own the lake, but the board had also been sending threats about land that didn't belong to them. As he walked back toward the cabin, he thought about the letters and inspections. They weren't just about rules. They were about control. The HOA wanted to make everyone follow their ideas of what was proper, even if it wasn't fair or legal. He realized that standing his ground wasn't about fighting. It was about knowing the truth and having the courage to act on it when the time was right. That evening, he started talking quietly to a few neighbors he trusted. He asked if anyone knew the history of the lake. One elderly man remembered when the developer sold the land and said the lake had always been private. Others were unsure, but the more they talked, the more it became clear. The HOA had been acting without full knowledge. He felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief because he finally understood the situation, and frustration because people had judged him without knowing the facts. He realized that sometimes the most peaceful people can be caught in conflicts they didn't ask for, simply because others want control. The next week, the HOA sent another letter, this time more aggressive. They threatened to take him to court if he didn't comply immediately. He smiled as he read it. Their confidence was high, but it was based on a mistake. They didn't know that he had proof. He decided it was time to prepare for the next HOA meeting. He wanted to attend, listen carefully, and present his findings. He didn't want to humiliate anyone or start an argument. He simply wanted to set the record straight. Before the meeting, he went back to the lake each evening. He repaired small sections of the dock, painted planks, and tested his boat. It wasn't about showing off. It was about enjoying the place he loved and being ready to explain why it was his. When the day of the meeting came, he brought the folder of documents. Inside were copies of the original deed, maps, and survey notes. He had highlighted the sections that proved the lake and part of the surrounding land belonged to him. As he entered the community clubhouse, he could feel the tension in the room. Residents whispered among themselves, and the board members looked uneasy. The president of the HOA began talking about rules, fines, and community standards, clearly expecting to intimidate him. When it was his turn, he spoke calmly. "I understand your concerns about the lake," he said, "but I've checked the records carefully. The lake and part of the surrounding land are part of my property. I own them. I'm happy to share the lake with neighbors, but I also need you to respect the legal boundaries." There was a long silence. No one knew what to say. Some residents looked shocked. The president tried to argue, but he held up the folder and said, "You can check these documents for yourself. I've confirmed them with the town office. The lake is mine." He left the meeting feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. The HOA might still try to challenge him, but now he had something more powerful than letters or threats. He had the truth on his side. That night he walked down to the dock again. The water was calm, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. For the first time in weeks, he felt completely at peace. The lake had been a place of quiet joy from the beginning, and now it was his safe place in every way, legally and emotionally. He knew the board might not admit it yet, and some neighbors might still be skeptical. But he also knew one thing: standing calmly, knowing the truth, and acting with patience was stronger than anger, fear, or threats. As he sat there, the gentle waves lapping against the dock, he realized that life in this quiet lakeside neighborhood had just become much more interesting. The battle was not about proving he was right. It was about making sure that what was his was respected. And with the proof in his hands, he felt ready for whatever came next. After the HOA meeting, he knew things were going to change, but he didn't expect how quickly the tension would grow. The silence from the board didn't mean they were backing down. If anything, it made him more aware that they were trying to figure out how to respond without losing face. He spent the next few days carefully planning his next steps, making sure every detail was correct and every document in order. He returned to the town office to double-check the property records. The clerk there smiled knowingly when he asked for help again. "Some of these cases are tricky," she said. "Most people just assume the HOA knows everything, but it's not always true." With her guidance, he went through older survey maps and historical deeds. Each page made it more and more obvious. The lake had been privately owned for decades, long before the neighborhood was even developed. The HOA had simply treated it as a shared amenity, making rules and fines as if it belonged to them. The thought made him shake his head. How could they have been so confident, so sure, and yet so wrong? He took the maps and records back to his cabin and spread them across the kitchen table. He traced the property lines carefully with his finger, following the curve of the lake and the edges of the land. Part of the parking lot that the HOA had long claimed as community property fell within his ownership. Even small sections near the boat launch were clearly on his deed. Knowing the truth gave him strength, but he also realized he needed help. Legal language can be confusing, and he didn't want to leave room for argument. He reached out to a local attorney, someone experienced with property disputes, and explained the situation. The attorney reviewed the documents and confirmed exactly what he suspected. The lake was part of his property, and the HOA had no legal right to dictate what he could do there. When he told the attorney that the HOA had already sent multiple letters and threats, the lawyer nodded. They may be in for a shock, he said. Once you show them the official records, everything changes. You don't even have to be aggressive. Just let the proof speak for itself. He felt a small surge of relief. For weeks he had been feeling the stress of their letters and inspections, wondering if he had made a mistake moving here. Now it was clear. He hadn't. The HOA had simply been enforcing rules on land they never owned. Over the next few days, he decided to prepare for the next HOA board meeting. This time he would not just speak, he would present the documents. He carefully organized the folders, making copies of all the records, maps, and deeds. He highlighted the most important parts, the sections that clearly showed the boundaries of his property. Meanwhile, life at the lake continued. He repaired a few more sections of the dock, repainted worn areas, and spent quiet evenings fishing or reading by the water. Neighbors noticed him working, some whispering as they passed by. A few who had been skeptical before started to nod quietly when they saw him showing care for the property. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure of what to think. A week before the meeting, he invited the same neighbors who had asked questions before to come quietly to the edge of the lake. "I just want you to see something," he said. He pointed out the survey markers along the shore, explaining how they confirmed the boundaries of his property. The neighbors listened closely, and some admitted they had assumed the lake was the HOA's to manage. "You own all of this?" one neighbor asked quietly, looking around at the water and the trees. "Yes," he replied. "I've checked with the town records. This land and the lake are mine. I'm happy for everyone to enjoy it, but the rules need to be based on facts, not assumptions." The day of the meeting arrived, and he felt a mixture of nerves and calm. He wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. He just wanted to make sure the truth was understood. The community clubhouse was packed more than usual. Some residents were curious, others seemed tense. The HOA president appeared flustered, clutching her clipboard as she began the meeting with the usual reminders about rules and fines. When it was his turn, he stood up slowly and spoke clearly. "I want to address the concerns about my dock and use of the lake," he began. "I've been getting letters and warnings for weeks. I understand that the board wants to maintain rules, but I've checked the official records. The lake and part of the surrounding land are included in my property deed. I own them." He handed over the folder of documents. "Here are copies of the town records, survey maps, and deeds. You can verify them yourselves." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Some residents leaned forward, eyes wide. Others whispered among themselves. The president tried to respond, but she hesitated. We weren't aware of this," she stammered. "We've always managed it as community property." "That's understandable," he said calmly. "But the law is clear. The lake and part of the land are mine. I'm happy to share the lake with neighbors who respect the property, but the HOA cannot enforce rules on land that doesn't belong to them." One of the board members spoke up. "Does this mean we've been issuing fines incorrectly?" "Yes," he replied. "Any previous fines or threats regarding the lake are invalid. The boundaries are clear in these documents." Some residents started clapping softly. Others looked shocked. The room was quiet for a moment as everyone absorbed what had just been said. After the meeting, a few board members stayed behind to talk to him quietly. They apologized for the misunderstanding and asked how to move forward. He explained that he didn't want conflict, only respect for the property lines. They agreed, and for the first time he felt the tension lift. As he walked home that evening, he thought about the past few weeks. The HOA had assumed control based on tradition and authority. not facts. People had judged him, sent letters, and even tried to intimidate him without checking the truth. But patience, calm, and careful attention to the facts had turned the situation around. By the time he reached the dock, the sun was setting. The lake glimmered with gold and orange reflections, just like it had the first night he arrived. He sat down, letting his feet touch the water, and took a deep breath. This place had become more than a home. It was a reminder that sometimes the quietest approach combined with truth could win over assumptions, rules, and authority. He knew the HOA might still be embarrassed or reluctant to fully admit their mistake. Some neighbors might take time to adjust, but now the lake was peaceful again, and he could finally enjoy it without constant fear of fines or letters. He could repair his dock, take his boat out, and simply be at home. And as he watched the stars reflect on the water, he realized something important. Ownership wasn't just about legal documents, it was about knowing your rights, standing quietly with confidence, and showing others that respect and fairness mattered more than control. The lake had always been his peaceful refuge, and now it was officially his too. The battle wasn't over yet, but he felt ready for whatever came next. The next HOA meeting was different from all the previous ones. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood that he had documentation proving the lake was his property. The clubhouse was packed more than ever. Some residents were curious, others were tense, and a few were whispering nervously in corners. The HOA board seemed uneasy. They had expected to control the meeting as usual. But now the balance of authority had shifted. The president began with her usual speech, reminding residents of rules, fines, and expectations for everyone. She glanced at him briefly, her eyes tight with frustration. It was clear she was hoping he wouldn't speak. He waited patiently, letting her finish. Then he stood up. There was no anger in his voice, just a calm confidence that made the room go silent almost instantly. "I've been receiving multiple letters and warnings from the board about my dock and use of the lake," he began. "I understand that you want to maintain rules and fairness, but I need to clarify something important. The lake, the dock, and even part of the surrounding land are included in my property deed. I legally own them." He placed the folder on the table and opened it carefully. "These are copies of the town records, survey maps, and deeds. You can see for yourselves. Everything is official. The boundaries clearly show that the lake is private property, and the board has no legal authority to issue fines or restrictions on land that doesn't belong to the HOA." The room went quiet. Some residents stared in disbelief. A few whispered to each other, eyes wide. The president's face changed color. She tried to speak, but her words faltered. That can't be right," she said. "The lake has always been considered community property. We manage it for everyone's benefit." He nodded slowly. "I understand how it looks, but the rules you enforce cannot override the law. Ownership is clearly defined in these documents. I am happy to share the lake with neighbors who respect the property, but the HOA cannot enforce rules here based on assumptions or past practice." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. "Does this mean we've been issuing fines and warnings incorrectly?" "Yes," he replied. "Any previous actions regarding the lake are invalid. They were based on a misunderstanding of the property boundaries." Some residents began murmuring, whispering among themselves. A few looked embarrassed. Others looked relieved, especially those who had quietly supported him but were too nervous to speak up before. The president cleared her throat, trying to regain control. "Well, we need to review these documents. We'll need time to verify everything." "You are welcome to verify them," he said calmly. "I obtained them from the town office and confirmed them with a surveyor. The boundaries are accurate. There is no dispute in the official records." A silence settled over the room. The confidence and authority the board had relied on for years were gone. For the first time, the HOA was unsure how to proceed. They had built rules around something they did not own, and their enforcement had no legal standing. A few residents spoke up quietly. One older neighbor said, "I remember when the developer sold the lake separately. I never thought it mattered, but now it makes sense." Another added, "We were all assuming the board had control, but it looks like we were wrong." The president shifted nervously. She tried to maintain her composure, but it was clear she was shaken. We didn't know," she admitted. "We've always acted in what we thought was the community's best interest." He smiled politely. "I understand. No one is blaming anyone. My goal isn't conflict. I just want to make sure the facts are understood and respected. That way everyone can enjoy the lake peacefully without fear of fines or disputes. Some of the board members exchanged glances, realizing that any attempt to challenge him now would be difficult. The official documents were clear, and he had presented them calmly and respectfully. They had no legal ground to continue threatening him. After a long pause, one of the board members spoke. "So, are you saying the dock and your use of the lake are fully legal?" "Yes," he replied. "Everything I have done is within my property rights. I'm happy to share the lake with neighbors, but the rules need to match reality." The mood in the room began to shift. What had started as a tense confrontation slowly turned into relief for some residents. They realized that the man they had thought was a rule breaker had simply been defending his home and his rights. A few neighbors came forward, offering quiet apologies. "I didn't know the lake was yours," one said. "I'm sorry for thinking otherwise," another nodded. "I didn't realize the HOA could be wrong about this." He accepted their apologies calmly. "Thank you. I want to live peacefully here just like everyone else. I have no problem sharing the lake, but I need respect for the property boundaries." The president remained quiet for a while, then said, "We will review the documents and discuss how to move forward. Thank you for bringing this to our attention." The meeting ended shortly after, and people slowly left the room. Some looked embarrassed, some curious, and some relieved. He walked out feeling a strange mixture of calm and satisfaction. He hadn't sought conflict, but he had stood firmly and calmly, letting the truth speak for itself. That evening, he returned to the dock. The water was calm, reflecting the colors of the sunset. For the first time in weeks, he felt completely at peace. The lake was quiet. The birds were settling in the reeds, and the work of the day melted away. He had faced a powerful group of people, stood for what was right, and done it without anger or aggression. As he sat there, he thought about what had happened. The HOA had tried to control something they didn't own. They had assumed authority and acted with confidence, but assumptions can't replace facts. Standing firm, remaining calm, and knowing the truth had made all the difference. He realized something important about people and power. Confidence alone doesn't make someone right. Assumptions and rules can be overturned by facts and patience, and sometimes the quietest, calmest person can hold more authority than those who shout the loudest. The lake had always been a place of peace for him, but now it also represented something more: clarity, justice, and the quiet strength of standing up for yourself in the right way. He would continue to care for the dock, repair boats, and enjoy the evenings on the water. But now he could do so without fear of fines, letters, or inspections from people who had assumed control over something they never owned. As the sky darkened and stars began to appear above the trees, he leaned back on the dock, letting the gentle waves touch his feet. The HOA had learned a lesson, the neighbors had learned a lesson, and he had proven to himself that patience and knowledge could overcome fear, authority, and false assumptions. The battle had been long and stressful, but it was over for now. The lake was quiet again, and so was he. The dock creaked softly under his weight as he sat there, thinking about how sometimes the right approach isn't anger, shouting, or threats. It's calm, preparation, and letting the truth speak for itself. And as the night settled over the lake, he knew that life in this quiet neighborhood would never be the same, not because of conflict, but because of respect, understanding, and the quiet realization that the lake he loved was finally and officially his. After the meeting, life around the lake slowly began to return to normal. But it was different now. The quiet tension that had hovered over the neighborhood for weeks had lifted. People walked past his cabin with a new curiosity, some nodding politely, others whispering quietly to neighbors. The HOA board avoided unnecessary attention, clearly embarrassed by the mistake and unsure of how to regain authority. He spent the next few days repairing his dock. The sun reflected off the water as he sanded worn planks and replaced old nails. It was peaceful work. For the first time in weeks, he didn't worry about letters, fines, or inspections. The lake was his, legally and practically, but he had no intention of keeping it a secret or excluding neighbors. He believed in quiet generosity and respect. Some neighbors approached him cautiously. One of them, an older man who had been quiet throughout the HOA drama, spoke first. "I didn't realize it was yours," he said, glancing at the water. "I'm sorry for doubting you." He smiled and shook his head. "It's okay." Most people just assumed the HOA had control. I don't hold it against anyone. I want everyone to enjoy the lake, but we need to respect the boundaries. Slowly, others began to join him by the dock. Some brought their small boats or fishing poles. Others just wanted to sit and watch the water. He welcomed them, explaining gently where the property lines were and encouraging them to follow simple rules of respect. Keep the lake clean, watch for safety, and be considerate of others. The dynamic of the neighborhood began to shift. The HOA board, humbled by the revelation, started to focus on legitimate community concerns like landscaping, roads, and shared amenities. They no longer attempted to enforce rules on the lake. Some board members quietly resigned, realizing they had been enforcing rules without authority. Others remained but learned a valuable lesson about humility and facts. He found himself spending more time on the lake, fixing boats, painting the dock, and simply enjoying the water. Children from nearby houses waved as they passed, and families began to use the lake with his permission. He didn't demand anything. He only asked for kindness and consideration. Over time, neighbors who had been skeptical before started to warm up to him, some even seeking advice about property or repairs. Life wasn't completely free of tension. A few residents still eyed him warily, holding on to old assumptions. But that didn't bother him. He had learned that people would adjust at their own pace. What mattered most was that the lake was peaceful, and he could enjoy it without constant conflict. One afternoon, as he worked on a small boat at the edge of the dock, a family approached. The father smiled awkwardly. "I just wanted to say thank you. I've seen the way the HOA treated you, and I wasn't sure what to think. Now I understand. It's good to have someone who respects the lake and the neighbors." He nodded politely. "Thank you. I want everyone to enjoy it, but we all need to be careful and respectful. That way it stays a place we can all love." As the days passed, he noticed subtle changes around the community. People were more cautious about assuming authority, more willing to verify facts, and more respectful of property boundaries. The tension that had once divided the neighborhood began to fade. He even noticed the HOA members walking past with quieter steps, avoiding unnecessary confrontation, focusing instead on practical management of other areas. He continued his evening routine of sitting on the dock, watching the water as the sun set. The reflections in the lake reminded him of the first nights he had arrived, quiet, beautiful, and full of possibility. But now the lake was more than just a peaceful place. It was a symbol of truth, patience, and respect. It reminded him that calm persistence and knowledge could overcome fear, authority, and misunderstandings. Sometimes neighbors joined him in the evenings. A few brought fishing poles, others brought chairs and blankets. They didn't need the HOA to organize events. The lake itself became a shared space of community, built on respect rather than rules. Children learned to fish safely. Neighbors helped each other repair small boats, and the atmosphere became cooperative instead of tense. He also began documenting his work and improvements around the lake. He kept records of repairs, improvements, and small notes about what areas of the lake were safe for swimming or boating. It wasn't because he wanted control, but because he cared. He wanted the space to remain beautiful, safe, and enjoyable for everyone. Months passed, and the neighborhood slowly settled into a new rhythm. The HOA no longer tried to impose unnecessary rules, and residents learned to trust him. He didn't need to prove himself anymore. His actions and respect for the property spoke louder than any letter or warning could. One evening, as he sat on the dock with a warm drink, he noticed a group of neighbors waving from the far side of the lake. They had set up small chairs and were laughing quietly. It was the first time he felt a true sense of community here, not because rules were enforced, but because people were cooperating, respecting boundaries, and enjoying the lake together. He reflected on the past few months. The conflict with the HOA had been stressful, even exhausting at times. He had received letters, inspections, and threats, and some neighbors had doubted him. But he had stayed calm, checked the facts, and presented them clearly. The outcome wasn't just about legal ownership. It was about fairness, truth, and respect. He realized something important. Standing up for yourself doesn't have to be loud or aggressive. Sometimes quiet patience, careful preparation, and respect for others can be more powerful than anger or confrontation. The lake had been a source of peace from the start, and now it had become a source of community, understanding, and mutual respect. The HOA, humbled by the experience, never attempted another confrontation. Their credibility had suffered, and they learned a valuable lesson about assuming authority without knowledge. Residents, too, learned to question assumptions and verify facts before judging others. He continued to restore boats and improve the dock, often sharing tips and tools with neighbors. The lake became a place of shared joy, not conflict. Families fished, kids played safely near the shore, and neighbors talked and laughed without fear of fines or lectures. As the seasons changed, the lake remained his sanctuary and a symbol of quiet resilience. It had survived conflict and uncertainty, and it had become something more than a piece of property. It was a reminder that calm persistence, patience, and honesty can change situations, heal misunderstandings, and bring people together. Sitting on the dock one evening, watching the last light fade over the water, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The lake was peaceful. Neighbors were learning to respect boundaries, and the HOA's influence over his property had ended. He had achieved what he wanted all along, a place of calm, respect, and enjoyment for himself and others. The gentle ripples of the lake reflected the sky, as if echoing the quiet victories of truth over assumptions. He leaned back, listening to the soft sounds of nature, knowing that he had not only protected his property, but also created a space where respect and community could flourish. The lake, once a source of conflict, had become a place of connection. The dock, the boat, and the waters themselves were symbols of patience, perseverance, and quiet strength. And as he sat there, he understood that sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones won without shouting, without anger, and without trying to control others, simply by knowing the truth and standing firmly in it. Life around the lake had changed, but it had changed for the better. And he knew that for years to come it would remain a place of peace, joy, and respect, a home in every sense of the word.